Muted.
And Prevention Month webinar series. It's very exciting to finally be talking about teen dating violence prevention and how exactly to do that. I would say that really up until just a few years ago, people didn't quite think that it was even possible to prevent violence in this way. So I think it's very exciting that now we are actually able to do this work and present about it. And we have enough information to really give some good guidance on how one might actually do this work if they are if they're trying to impact that in their communities. And so I do just want to introduce myself, give you a little bit of an agenda, and then also just give you some house rules related to this webinar and us being on here. We are recording this webinar as a resource for future trainings for people to use. And so if you're not comfortable sharing something in the chat bar, don't share anything you're not comfortable sharing. Additionally, just know that we're going to use this again in the future. So really, I think if you need to use it in the future, let us know, and we would be happy to provide it for you. It'll also be widely available. But just remember, we are recording right now. I also went ahead and muted everyone's phones just so that we can cut down some of that noise that can happen sometimes when people are when we're hearing on people's phones. So just know that you're muted. If you have a question, go ahead and type it into the chat box, and I'll also provide my email. I'll go ahead and provide my email now, and I'll also go ahead and say it for folks that are going to be listening later. I am not Maria, although that's what it might say. That's just what our go-to training account is set for. But my name is actually Claudia, and I'm a prevention coordinator at the Alaskan Network on Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. And I'm lucky to be able to do this work. I was one of those kids in college that we studied all of these social problems, and we got to the end of the classes, and I would always raise my hand, and I would always be like, so, okay, what do we do about this? And there wasn't always a lot of solutions outside of, well, we need to do more, we need to publish more, we need to write more books and that kind of thing. And really doing this work has made me feel like that it is really possible to prevent violence and to make a difference. And so that is who I am. I've been doing this work for about 5 years. I feel very lucky that I get to work with communities on an almost daily basis, and that I get to work with youth on a daily basis. And so that's who I am. And, I think that there is a lot that we've learned, and it's not just the knowledge that I hold here, but my organization has been doing this work for a while, and we continue to learn. So there's lots that, you yourself, you can take this knowledge and adapt it to your community, and let us know how it goes, because we're always learning as well. So I'm going to start out this webinar just telling you a little bit about the rates of violence. We're going to talk a little bit about how we're preventing violence, what is our model that we're using, and we're also going to talk about best practices for working with youth, and I would love to hear some of those as well that are coming from you, from folks that are doing work in your own communities. And then we're going to talk about some national resources and programs, both Alaska programs and national programs, and talk a little bit about those lessons learned that we've kind of gathered throughout the years. So before we start, though, could you go ahead and let us know your name and where you're from, if you're comfortable doing that? And we have some folks from Homer. We have Amy and Angie from Homer. We also have Jerry from Ketchikan, so two totally different regions there. Who else do we have on the call? Go ahead and tell me. Go ahead and write in the chat bar where you're from and your name. And if you feel like it, what kind of work that you do. All right, so we've got Ricky from WAVE in Petersburg. Welcome, Ricky. Awesome. So DVSA So DVSA advocate, we also have Angel from Anchorage, and Awake. So we've got a lot of folks that are maybe doing direct service work, which is great. It's always great to hear folks expanding their skill set and really be able to think about additional things that they can do, both maybe for their work, but also as a community partner. I think that it's certainly appropriate to use some of this information. Who else do we have on the call? All right, we have Jenny Baker. She's a public health sort of guru, and so she's one of our awesome partners around the state. And we'll chat a little bit about the work that we're doing with Jenny at the end of this webinar. So awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. I know there's some folks that are on the line that maybe didn't share where they're from. Welcome to you as well. You know, I think that as far as really thinking about how we do this work and why it's really important to do this work, we might kind of think that violence maybe is not totally preventable, right? And that's really not what we have found. And so why do we do this work, though, and how are we doing this work? And, you know, oddly enough, all of you all working in the shelters, it is actually through some of your work that we started building this prevention program here at the Alaskan Network. We work with shelter programs around the state. The directors at these shelter programs, some of these ladies working in the shelter programs for 30 or so years, really were noticing that different generations of the same family were coming in to seek services. And ultimately, what they were saying is that, you know, we aren't seeming to make a long-term difference. And it's really good that we're providing these services. We certainly need that for survivors. But what can we do so that this doesn't keep happening, and it doesn't keep happening for our teens and for our young people, so that we can really stop that cycle before it starts? And we know that what they were telling us is based in data. We know that 1 in 5 women, you know, might experience sexual assault in their lifetime. 1 in 3 have experienced teen dating violence, and that's for teens. You know, teen dating violence can really look a lot of different ways. It could be psychological. It could be, it doesn't have to always be physical, but we really do have pretty high rates. Yeah, do you mind? So we might have Kaya here email this PowerPoint out to folks, just so that we can, just so that we have it out here. But we also have, you know, a high percentage of high schoolers. Those rates are kind of starting early, and you know, there might be a belief out there that, you know, violence doesn't go both ways, but we see that in our youth populations there is, you know, high percentage of sexual assault experience, both boys and girls. And more importantly, the piece that really our shelter directors were getting at is that teen violence, so those pieces that maybe those teens were witnessing in their adolescence within their own families, were a precursor for future patterns and for them experiencing intimate partner violence as an adult. And so it was really, really important for us to start doing prevention and to figure out exactly how do we prevent violence before it starts. And we also know that Alaska, the prevalence numbers I just gave are national numbers. We also know that Alaska has higher numbers than that. And so it's really important for us to particularly do this work, and for us to do it in a way that relates to Alaska and relates to our communities that we're working with. So, you know, and as far as our state and as far as what services mean for all of us, there's a lot of long-term care that goes into providing these services, which are really needed, and our shelters are so important to those victims. And lot of adverse health implications that are long-term implications. And so if we could, there's that saying, right, that 1 ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. But the idea is that all of sort of these long-term implications, if we could both work on providing services and preventing violence in the future, then we're really going to have that bigger of an impact. And so here at the Alaskan Network, we really started working with the idea that we needed to provide services, but then also think about preventing violence in the future. So I told you a little bit. About how we really, the reasoning behind this work. Now, how did we build up prevention, and how did we do that? Well, we took a public health model, which was that any attitude, any belief that leads to a behavior is not created in a vacuum. And we know that if we can impact those habits early on, and if we can impact them from multiple sources within sort of a social ecological system, and we can talk about what that looks like in a little bit later, if we applied that to a public health model, we could be just as successful as there was lots of diseases that were getting passed on sort of in the 19th century. And so public health said, hey, we all need to wash our hands, and we all need to be more clean. And here's what germ theory kind of came around and helped people understand what was making them sick. And so we went from having these really high rates of contagious diseases to lowering those numbers. And we're trying to apply a very similar model to doing that, and to get all of those systems in place across the social ecological system, so schools and parents and students, all of them on the same page, we can really make a difference. And just so that you all kind of understand as well, that it really is much more than just working on one problem at a time. You can partner with a lot of different folks on this issue, and really the reason is that a lot of the solutions that we came up with, a lot of the things that we were able to promote and help people be less likely to be victims of teen dating violence were protective factors that protected young people from multiple problem behaviors. And so if we could promote those protective factors for students, we saw that other behaviors went down as well. Bullying, suicide, self-harm, these other things went down, and so it was really beneficial for us to promote those protective factors, and they seem to work for multiple issues. And so this image here really shows that we don't just grow up in a vacuum. We don't turn 30 and all of a sudden we're going to start dating and we have unhealthy ideas about what our relationships might look like. Instead, those beliefs that we build around respect or boundaries at age 10, we're going to build on those at age 13. And by the time we really start dating at 16, notice I'm saying that people are dating at 16. That's probably not very accurate there, maybe a little younger, right? But all of those beliefs we really carry with us, and so our current self carries those with them as well. And so for us to make a difference, we really have to have multiple points of contact, work with young people from an early age, and have that message come from multiple sources. And so primary prevention is really simple. It really means stopping violence before it starts. And even saying that can still seem really hard to do, but we're gonna break that down. And I think the last piece that, and I've said it before, but I think that there is a really important piece here to be said, is that primary prevention is really important, but it is coupled with tertiary prevention and with services that we provide. And so all of us together, we can kind of form this system to provide victim services, but then also to help protect future victims from experiencing violence in the first place. So, so has anybody heard of the hot dogs for breakfast analogy? Go ahead and type it in the comments. I'm sorry. I will also unmute you all. I want to say it as well. Have you heard of the hot dogs for breakfast analogy? All right, so we've got a few folks that have heard it and some folks that haven't. And one of the biggest things is really trying to wrap our brains around how we can prevent something that hasn't happened yet, right? Now, a useful analogy, and I've used it with students as well, and it seems to work, is really asking the question of, why don't we have hot dogs for breakfast? And so, what are some of those reasons? Go ahead and type it in the chat box if you feel like it. But how come, we wake up and it doesn't occur to me to go to the fridge, get some hot dogs, and make myself breakfast? And there's reasons for that, right? So what are some of the reasons that one might actually, what are the reasons why we eat what we eat for breakfast, right? And so when it comes to this analogy, when we try to explain it to folks, people are like, well, hot dogs aren't in the breakfast section, so it never occurs to me to grab them for breakfast, right? I wasn't served hot dogs for breakfast when I was growing up. I didn't see commercials that were telling me hot dogs are an option for breakfast or that we should eat them. I also, didn't have them on my school's breakfast menu either. And so really the whole framework around hot dogs is that it's something else. It's not a breakfast food. And so if a hot dog company all of a sudden said, okay, you know what, we really need to move into the breakfast market. We really need to get people to eat hot dogs for breakfast. How would we do that? How would we get people to eat hot dogs for breakfast? And the solutions might, surprise you, but they're also very logical. We see things like this all the time around us, right? But again, maybe we start serving it for breakfast. Maybe we start a campaign that says, hey, have you considered hot dogs for breakfast? Why not? Maybe that you should. Maybe we hire LeBron James, and he's eating this awesome hot dog for breakfast, and he just is loving it, right? And so there's so many, societal reasons. There's so many different things that really form our opinions about something. And so if we really wanted to change a norm, which eating hot dogs for breakfast is not currently a norm, if we wanted to change that norm, we would have to go and access all of those different places. We would have to access our relationships, so we'd have to teach parents to relate to kids through hot dogs and serve those for breakfast. We would have to work with our schools. We would have to work with our media campaigns. And ultimately, maybe slowly over time, we might shift people to start eating hot dogs for breakfast. And that norm wouldn't be the same after accessing all of those contact points. And so if we look at a social ecological model, we see that an individual doesn't, like we said earlier, doesn't come up with their attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors in a bubble. But really, we learn those norms from our influencers, and really that means our relationship with other people. That means our families. That means our peers, so other youth, for example, that you're around, learning their norms. The norms in our community. Does our community eat hot dogs for breakfast? And if so, why not? And what do they eat for breakfast? And our society. And so what is okay to eat for breakfast in our society? And it's the same thing with our relationships. So across all of these different levels, we really have to share the same message and work together. So it might seem to you like I'm asking you to do a lot, but I think that over time, we can look at all of these different levels we can look at all of these different aspects of the social ecological model, and we can start building on our work so that they impact that individual from multiple sources. But it's okay if we build up that work over time. So we know that some protective factors, and so what we've done and what we know from research is that some protective factors for individuals that are going to make them less likely to be a victim of violence or be a perpetrator of violence at the individual level are being able to be successful at school, having positive self-confidence, having a substance-free lifestyle, negative view of violence, being connected to your culture, and financially also as an individual being able to meet your basic needs. Does this kind of make sense to folks? To me, you know, I think it makes sense because I think if we can provide all of these things and if we can work on creating an environment for an individual to have these basic things, then why would somebody with positive self-confidence be violent maybe? Or what if somebody that's really connected to themselves or their culture, you know, if they're not impaired by alcohol and drugs? These are all factors that really have seemed to help, and these are the things that we started focusing on at the individual level. And so, but knowing, so Ricky, so right, so we see individuals that are in crisis mode, that aren't making good decisions, that aren't able to sort of meet their basic needs. And so that can have an impact in how you view yourself and how you view other people and how you behave. And so having those basic needs really seems to protect people. And so it's more than just learning, right, about healthy relationships. It is much more than that. And I think if we look at our youth work and what we try to provide and some of the things that we do is we try to teach you some of those healthy relationship skills so that they have a negative view of violence. But then also we try and see if we can help them with their school success. We help them learn some leadership skills. We also try to, if they want to do work to prevent bullying or substance abuse in their community, you say, oh yes, go ahead, go for that project. We will support you doing that because we know that will mean healthier individuals. And so ultimately that's how we've been able to try to support that individual in making better choices. We've also been working with parents, and we know that these are the protective factors when we look at the relationship and influencer level. And so we work with peers, we work with youth leaders to make sure that youth have access to friends with attitudes that don't support violence. We have just positive peer leaders that maybe aren't talking always about violence, but they're modeling good behaviors. And we have good relationship between parents and youth. And we also have family values that are clear in their, that they don't support violence. So does that also make sense for folks as far as really trying to have that impact across our community? Okay. And so here we are at the community level. And so we also try to work on creating that larger context. So we have media messages that promote no violence, that promote youth being leaders and working with one another. And we also try to legislate for better accountability for perpetrators, and so that folks know, hey, there's some things that might happen, or there's some, you know, there's consequences for choices, and also changing those norms to reduce sexual entitlement, so that partners know this is how you respect each other, whether you're in a heterosexual relationship or any kind of relationship. Really, it's about reducing that sexual entitlement and people having healthier relationships together. So this was sort of a lot of information in how we're trying to do this work. And so what I want to do now is I just want to encourage you and let you know that there is a lot of prevention training out there for you to build on and for you to think about. And the Alaskan Network on Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault has some of that training. We will provide these links as well, but you can build on this knowledge. And so it may seem like there's a lot we're asking you to do. It also may seem like maybe it's, how can you possibly do this? However, there's a lot more training, And when we work together and we build up our ability to do this work over time, that's really when we're going to be really successful. So certainly it took us a long time to develop and to get to this point. So I encourage you to just start learning more, reaching out, and so just trying to continue that education, because you're not expected to do this all right away, and there's a lot more out there, but you can build on some basic things. So now I'd like to just open it up for some questions. Are there folks that have any questions related to sort of the way that we applied this model or the way that we're doing this work? I would love to answer any of those questions now. And there'll also be some time at the end. And for those of you that just arrived, go ahead and type that into the chat box. It's a little bit easier for us to ask questions that way, so that we don't run into sort of sounds or noises from people's phones. Okay, well, if there's any questions, I will try and look up. I think the biggest thing, though, and the best way I think to start, and one of the most accessible things that you can do, is really start thinking about working with youth. And I think that youth really are, they are those peers to younger youth. I also think that youth are very excited about doing this work, and we've been doing this work across the state in a lot of different communities. Now, not all youth are going to be excited about doing this work, but a lot of youth will be. And so it's really about trying to find those best practices as far as working with youth. And so remember I was saying earlier that this really takes some time to build up what we're doing. And so best practices as far as working with youth. And what I have found is that really it's about long-term community investment. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. Youth being able to talk about healthy relationships is going to take some time. And so if we put 1 or 2 year sort of investment, and that could look like engaging volunteers, it doesn't have to be sort of a paid position, but if we do 1 to 2 year investment, and this is how long it could take, it could also go faster too. But what I have seen is that in 1 to 2 years, agencies will be able to put on really good one-time engagement activities and events. And those are really good for spreading awareness. Those are really good for promoting those initial leadership skills for youth. But overall, it's going to take a little bit of time before you have a youth leadership group that is developed, that has goals and objectives. And only about maybe a few years after that, will we actually be able to train those youth to do some of those policy changes and to do impact work beyond their group. And so I think that it's really about thinking of your community in that way and thinking about this work in that way and finding the right people to do the work. That includes youth and adults. There's lots of folks that, you know, have been doing this on a volunteer basis. But it takes some time, and so this is sort of the pattern that we've noticed. It takes a little bit of time to get there, but over time, youth are not just going to be impacting their peers and themselves, but they're actually the community and the systems that they leave behind. And so what we saw is that students were saying, we have this youth group now, but after every time it turns over, some of these changes, you know, we have to keep fighting for them every single year. So how do we make sure that these changes stay for the long term? And that's when they got to that last sort of policy changes work. But it really took some time, and it took some youth that were that really had developed great leadership skills together and had some great youth support. So what are, does that sort of make sense as far as this progression and growth? So I think another piece, and I'm sorry, folks, just that you all are muted. It just I tried unmuting just a little bit ago, and there was still some noises going on. You are all unmuted now, and everything's okay. So if there's something that you would like to share, go ahead. But I really think that about the community and the youth and that work as long-term really eases some of that pressure off of happen all at once. And so another piece that we have found really successful is to really focus on community needs. And so when we worked with youth and we said, do something that you care about in your community and what you're passionate about, and then we also wanted them to maybe work on teen dating violence, we found that there was kind of a mishmash there. And so we said, hey, if you want to work on bullying or if you want to work on a different topic in your community with some elements of respect maybe, or with some elements of some of those protective factors that these issues have in common, let's focus on that community need, because that youth is going to be that much more excited if they feel like they can plan their own project, that they can implement it in a way that makes sense for their community, and ultimately they are the expert in their community, and they are the expert in what youth in their community might be thinking about. And so it makes a lot more sense for us to say, to give up some of that control, let youth take some of that, take the wheel and take the project where they need it to go and where it makes the most sense to go. And, you know, we've also had really some good success with evaluation as well. You know, it depends on the type of program, and we've had some funded projects inside communities that had more expectations. But overall, we work with students and we say, how are you going to evaluate this project? If it makes more sense for you to go around and record what youth are saying, maybe we can do that. If it makes sense for youth because they don't want to share out or get recorded, if it makes sense for them to write it on a piece of paper and to submit it anonymously, that works too. So it's really about thinking of the community need and working on that and not trying to shift that agenda too much. And youth eventually are going to talk about healthy relationships, but it might take some time, and in the meantime, they'll still be making an impact on those some of those statistics. We've also found that it is very helpful to work with the entire community. Now, I don't know what it's like for youth in your community, but I would say that from my conversations with youth, they tell me that, you know, we're not in charge of our entire community. We don't get to make the rules at school. We don't get to, you know, we don't get to have a say in how things are decided. And we certainly can't always impact the entire community, even if we really want to. So it made a lot more sense to work with entire communities. What we did is we started engaging with some of those adults that were coming to our programming and giving them training so that they were more comfortable working with youth, supporting youth as they were doing their projects and as they were growing. And additionally, youth feel connected to their communities. They care about all of their communities. And so teen dating violence sometimes to them just meant, well, so you mean I can't work with the little kiddos? I can't maybe do some positive activities for them? You know, what about the elders? How do we engage them? And so for them, there was no separation between themselves and their community. And so it made a lot more sense to just say, how do we work with the entire community? How do we impact the teachers as well, the schools as well if we can? And how do we work with the adults that are supportive to continue to be supportive and to help the youth grow in a positive way? And I like to use this model here because we know youth are not coming up with their perceptions and attitudes and behaviors in a bubble, but they really do come from their peer context, from their schools and their communities, and also, you know, even from the larger context here in the United States. So knowing that that's where youth sort of relationship quality depends on, we really have to work on all of those pieces for it to have an effect and to have an impact. And so does anybody have any thoughts on that? And I'll go ahead and try and unmute you all again for a second. And so go ahead and mute yourself unless there's something that you want to share with the group. But what did you all think about this model, and does it make sense? What are your thoughts around working with the entire community versus just trying to engage youth in this work? Seems like maybe someone's trying to communicate, isn't getting through. So if you can, possibly go ahead and type it into the chat box. All right. All right, so we'll move on. Another piece that was very important was youth voice. And so we talked about how important youth are to each other when they form those beliefs, when they're learning what is normal, what is healthy in a relationship. And so when we're creating programming, we have to involve youth, and we have to involve them as full partners. And I always give this example, but if you had a business partner that didn't check in with you before making decisions, or didn't schedule things around what you had going on, or just, you know, never quite listened to your ideas unless it was on very specific tasks that they chose. So these are some of the things that I have heard adults have done to youth in a working relationship, or in a sort of in a planning in the planning stages of a project and things like that. And so youth voice is not just important because, you know, because it's going to make this project more successful for them, for the community, but also because these youth themselves have some growing and learning to do on their own. And so it's important for us to think about and to keep in mind that as they're giving us their ideas and their beliefs and their thoughts on how to make this impact, they're developing those skills. And so, you know, it's about listening to that voice, it's about including it and creating ways to ensure that it's actually heard. And so, you know, there's been calls where sometimes, you know, us adults are busy chatting on the phone call and stuff like that, and teens would maybe text me something instead so that that voice can be heard. And it made sense to do that. It maybe create some additional systems to make sure that their voice is heard, and that they develop as leaders for themselves, and then also for the sort of the potential impact of this project. And so one of the things that we found is that we also needed to talk with parents. And so we started chatting with parents and making sure that they also were carrying out some conversations. And so when we said work with the entire community and include youth voice, this is what it brought us to. When we asked youth, you know, do your parents talk to you about this topics? They said, not really. You know, I talked to my friends about it, or I talked to my teacher or my friend's mom, but I don't talk to my parents about it necessarily. So we really thought it makes a lot more sense to engage both parents and youth, and to engage the entire community. So with all of this information, I really do encourage you, as you start working with youth, to just keep in mind some of these best practices. Try to work with the entire community, find supportive adults that can help those youth, think about the youth voice and ask them what they want to get out of this experience, and think about their long-term development, and their and also the long-term development of your program or project. So I will go into talking a little bit about the resources that you have available to you. Like I said, there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of knowledge out there now in how to engage youth, in how to engage communities, and then also I encourage you to continue to train. So you don't have to have all the answers right now. You don't have to sort of know exactly what you're doing, but you can sift through all of these different resources and think about what might be acceptable or adaptable to your community. And if you don't know what that might be, just go ahead and ask either students or adults as to what might be beneficial in their community and in your community. So there are some really great resources as far as referring youth to youth that maybe need help or need to talk to a peer advocate. This is something that as you enter the work, you're going to be running into. And so if you're talking about healthy relationships, students are going to maybe disclose. And they may also not disclose to you, because many of us come from small communities where people are going to know who we're dating, right? Or people might know exactly who we're talking about, even if we're talking about a friend. And so I think for youth, this is really important to always have this number up for those times where they need direct intervention, when they need to talk to somebody and they may not feel comfortable with that being you. And so what I try to do is I just try to have this number up sort of wherever I'm at during different presentations, so that students really know this is what I can do to reach out. And I also don't have to call anybody. I can text, which seems to be a much more comfortable way of relating, of them sharing out and asking for help. And so there's also, and you all probably have missed it for this month, right? But you're here now, so that's awesome. But Teen Dating Violence Awareness and Prevention Month is also another great way to start the conversation in your community. There's lots of resources at Love is Respect. There's some themes around how to build awareness, both using sort of an announcement system and also you know, some of those other things like Wear Orange Day and some other pieces. And then they also have a ton of information on online bullying and social media use and things like that. So I really encourage you to check out those pieces of information and to think about how you might get hooked into those types of things in sort of maybe next year. So there's lots of resources there. They'll be in the PowerPoint as well. We also have our Alaska resources. They're called standupspeakupalaska.org. That's our website. We're doing these weekly webinars. We also have materials and resources, and we also have some excellent examples of what this work might look like inside the community. So there's some examples there of videos that youth have created, and then some projects as well of them taking these ideas and bringing them back to their communities. So go ahead and check those resources, and then we also have a Facebook page if you wanted to connect with other folks that are interested in doing this work. Also, as you think about engaging folks in your community, parents are a good source of some of that worry, but they often don't know. You know, so if you talk to parents, they're like, oh yes, I'm very worried about this. I think this is very important. Conversations are really important, but they don't always know what to do. So parents are also a good starting point, and there are some resources related to parents as well. And there's conversation cards as well that we have created here in Alaska. So visit tntoak.org to find out more about what that can look like and how you can actually encourage parents through some real good concrete tools to start those conversations with their teens. And, you know, I think a lot of your work, too, will be sort of getting others to join and thinking about who else in the community might be interested in doing this work. Additionally, maybe who else is already doing this work. So I know that there's some grants out there on social and emotional learning Now, a lot of the things that they're promoting and a lot of the things that they're doing are actually pretty much in line with violence prevention sort of practices. And so I think it's really about partnering with others to start looking at what others are doing in your community, knowing who your audience is. So if you're presenting to a school, maybe social and emotional learning is the way that you might want to frame this. If you're presenting to a Boys and Girls Club, that might look different. And if you're presenting to parents, that also might look different. There's lots of free resources. There's also resources in your community. So don't hesitate to use those, and don't start from the beginning. Don't be hesitant to adapt messages. So think about what your community might need and what might work there, and take them and adapt it. I think if you don't know what your community needs, then maybe you can ask. Maybe you can work with some folks, maybe ask different ages of folks, or maybe folks representing different parts of your community, but find out what works in your community and don't be afraid to adapt it. It takes a lot of work to sort of get this knowledge across to people. There's a lot of training, like we talked about earlier. And so some folks might not know some of this information. Some folks might have, unhealthy beliefs themselves, even as adult partners, let's say. And so just meet people where they're at, but make sure that you continue to do that education. And so with youth, it's just the beginning when they start to join our program, but we continue to build up that knowledge, knowing that wherever they started, they're going to make some progress. So really be patient with youth partners and with adult partners and meet them where they're at. I think the last step really, and I mentioned it before with the chat helpline, there's going to be some folks that this close to you. There's going to be some folks that when we bring up these topics, it stirs things up for them. So how are you ready to help? What is your plan for doing that? And, it doesn't have to be you that figures it out, but definitely know what your plan is and who else you can bring in to help. And always, let kids know, if you're a mandatory reporter, that whatever they share with you, you're going to have to report. And so, but just know that there's going to be times with the rates being so high that you might have to be, that you might have to help, and you might have to help connect youth to some resources right away. And so just know that that might come up. And I think the last piece for us, and this is just to encourage you some more, but we're continuing to learn our own work and our own self in what makes the most sense to do as far as our students and how to prepare them for the long term, and then also for skills that they need to use right now. And so this year at our youth leadership gathering in Anchorage, we included sexual health. And so we talked about consent, we talked about healthy sexuality, about identity. We talked about all these topics that youth for the longest time were saying, this is such a big part of relationships. How come we're not talking about them? And so we included this this additional topic because it was a natural growth for us, and it was a gap. And so we worked with our partners who were the experts to help us figure out how to do that. We also figured out that once our students, and our program is one of our most impactful programs is called Lead On. Once our students leave Lead On, and they're maybe that 18 to 24 age range, there's a lot of unmet needs that they still continue to have. And so we're brainstorming and we're coming up with ways to support those alumni. And I think that that's really been important for us to think about for that long-term growth for our youth, so that these impacts that we're making and these skills that they are building can be for the long term. And again, I think that's also the other piece that we want to do there, is really think about how to promote long-term skill building and success for students and for their communities. And so that's also what we're trying to stretch our work out to. And I think, ultimate goal for all of us and for anybody that cares about our communities, and this was beautifully said by one of our students, but she said, in the future, I want to know the cycle of famine, not the cycle of violence. was referring to, when she becomes an elder. So she really wants to change that and have people learn these positive things and not learn from, a very young age that violence is part of life. So I think if we're all ultimately focused on that, and I believe that a lot of us are, and we care about our communities, we certainly can get there. And I'm very positive that we can do this. We can certainly prevent violence in Alaska. We're very connected, and we also have done this great work to build up our programming and our practices to sort of reach that maximum impact and to make a difference for youth in their everyday lives. So that was a lot. And it's all accessible to you online. You can also share this recording with others. And I am also available to answer some questions, both now and after, maybe after you've processed a little bit. Are there any questions? And I want to thank you all for hanging in there with me. And go ahead and type them in the chat box. Okay, awesome question, Denny. So collaboration does take a lot of work. I will agree with you. And the way that we know, and I think that that's one of the pieces of education that we all can continue to do, the way that we know that this programming is working is that we evaluate our programming. And so we have tried to come up with measures that go across that social ecological model. And so we are asking students, did your skills as an individual related to healthy relationships, and then this year we also added healthy sexuality, have those skills changed at all? Do you feel like you're more able or to distinguish, for example, between healthy and unhealthy relationships? And then we measure that. So we see if that happened at the individual level. We then also try and measure at the next level up to say, hey, what happened to your ability to talk to other people, to maybe create messages around respect, to put on projects about respect, and also what happened to your leadership skills? Did those improve at all? What do you think about that? And youth then could report out to us whether that sort of relational piece also shifted for them, right? And we also do some measurements with the adults to see, has their knowledge improved around how to support students, and has their knowledge improved around prevention and violence and sort of these area of knowledge that we want them to think about before they're doing this work. And I think the last piece that we also try to measure to make sure that this is happening at the community level too is we try and measure what happens when youth go back to their communities. And if youth are able to do community impact projects, and keeping in mind where they're started at and how long they've been doing their programming, are they able to do something in their communities? Are they able to pull together folks from their communities and do impact work there? So impact work that's related to our program, but also their own. And so that's sort of the last measurement that we use to say, this also seems to be going out to the community level. And so we've seen really successful community work that took place in Sitka, where youth are leaving with improved skills for themselves, and then also we see community impact. We've seen really great community work take place in Homer, and we've seen really great community work take place in Anchorage and Bethel. So we see it happening sort of in a lot of different ways. And we also know that for some of those smaller activities, the way we measure that impact and the way that sometimes we look at it is we might start out saying, like, who was there and were we able to get the youth to do something? And that might be our first measurement, but then we build on that. So that's sort of, so I encourage all of you, that was a great question, Jenny. I encourage all of you to think about and learn more about that evaluation piece of doing prevention, and ANDVSA.org has some great trainings but learn about how to do evaluation, because it's really, it's about planning for it. It's about thinking about evaluation and your goals and your outcomes before you start your program and not after. And so really being thoughtful and clear so that we know what our measurements are and how we're doing this work and how we're going to be able to tell whether we've been successful or not. Did that answer your question, Denny? Or well enough? Awesome. Are there any other questions? All right. Well, I don't want to keep you too much further past 4 o'clock, but I just want to say thank you. I think that there's some really great work happening in a lot of different communities. A lot of your communities are already connected with us and doing some work. So if you're interested in finding out more about what your community is doing, well, you might know it because you might know it better, but there's also some connections that we can create here at the network. So I'm going to go ahead and put my email address one more time in the chat box. And I'm also going to email out this PowerPoint. And feel free to call us, reach out to us with any questions or concerns. And definitely explore some ongoing projects and some programs that are out there, because there's a lot of great stuff out there. And you being the expert in your community, you can take that information and adapt it. So I think it's definitely doable. Sweet. All right. So, Jenny, very cool. So, awesome. Sweet. Thank you, Lucy. And I don't think that I caught where you were from. But Jenny had a really great question, and there's some additional webinars that we're going to be looking at this month. So check out, and we'll go do this right now. But standupspeakupalaska.org. So we're looking at weekly webinars until March 1st. The next one coming up next Wednesday is on self-care strategies and activities for youth. Oh, sweet. Great to have you on, Lucy. So it's really about thinking up, and again, we're doing this work, think about youth for the long term. And so self-care strategies and activities for youth, it's really about promoting those good behaviors for youth to be able to take care of themselves and for us to be able to be good partners to them. And so when we do this work, it's important to think about how we provide that self-care for our students and why that's important. On February 22nd, we're also going to be talking about trauma-informed youth engagement. We're partnering with Opt-in Guyana, who it's a youth group that was started through Lead On, and they've been doing some really great work in engaging with students and providing sort of alternative activities, but then also really inclusive, really inclusive systems for the students to give feedback, for the students to be involved, for the students to still be able to be part of all of these different things and conferences, but at their skill level and with what they're comfortable with. And so Jean Gerhardt-Cyrus will be joining us with a couple of students to talk about their group and to talk about how they do trauma-informed youth engagement. And for March 1st, we're going to talk about those shared risk and protective factors. It's so important that we work collaboratively, and it's so important that we find those other people that are on our team that we can do work with. And because so many protective factors cut across issues, I think it's really, really important to figure out how to strategically use that for our partnerships. And so we're really going to be talking about what those links are between the forms of violence, and then what are some strategies for using those links and being successful in doing violence prevention in your community. Awesome. Well, thanks, Jenny. That was another great question. And again, feel free to share this webinar as well with anybody that couldn't join us. All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking time on a Wednesday to listen to me. Reach out with questions, and I look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. Perfect. And we'll get this PowerPoint out. Thank you.